As we're preparing our hearts while the sun is setting, I wish you all happy Sabbath. Tonight we will begin the study in chapter 10 of Revelation. Just a little recap to enhance the flow of understanding and the continuity between the chapters. Revelation is divided to 3 parts, not including the prologue and the epilogue. The first part we already studied, which is focused on the historic situation on God's churches, the problems internally and externally. And then the second part starts from chapter 4 to 11. And we saw and still seeing how the history unfolds from the first century until the end of time. And from chapter 12 to 22 verse 5, this is the third part. And it is about the end time events or the end time crisis, judgment leading to the second coming of Christ and the establishment of his kingdom. And currently we are in the second part of Revelation. Chapter 9, we already studied, was about the 7th trumpet. And just to have you to remember what it was about. It was a series of events that God sent in history intent to vindicate God's people and to bring about changes for salvation. The first 2 trumpets was judgment to those who crucified Christ and those who persecuted the early church. And the third and the fourth trumpets was about judgment to those who practiced apostasy during the medieval and post-Reformation eras. And those are the time that people follow their tradition and abandon the truth. The 5th and the 6th trumpet describe the condition of the secular world in the after effect of the age of enlightenment. They also call it the age of reasoning. And that includes the time we are in right now. And this is when people abandon traditional authority, including the Christian faith. And this period of time is characterized by extensive demonic activity. In studying history, we could see that Satan and his agents has been using different ways to destroy men's faith in God. Chapter 10, we are in the second part, as I mentioned, and describe the unfolding of history. And it is an interlude or a pause between the time of the 6th and the 7th trumpet. It is a chapter that describes the condition of God's people and their mission during this time. Let's start reading verse 1. Then I saw another mighty angel coming down from heaven. He was robed in a cloud, with a rainbow above his head. His face was like the sun, and his legs were like fiery pillars. This mighty angel was no other than Christ Jesus, according to the SDA Bible commentary. Let me explain. In the Bible, a cloud usually is about the coming of Christ. And rainbow was a sign of God's covenant, also part of the glory of the throne of God. The sun, you remember, it was a description of Jesus' face on the Mount of Transfiguration. And his legs were like fiery pillars. It was described Jesus' feet in also chapter 1 of Revelation. Can also allude to the pillar of fire in the wilderness during the Exodus. Verse 2. He was holding a little scroll which lay open in his hand. He planted his right foot on the sea and his left foot on the land. Verse 3. And he gave a loud shout like the roar of a lion. When he shouted, the voices of the seven thunders spoke. Verse 4. And when the seven thunders spoke, I was about to write, but I heard a voice from heaven say, seal up what the seven thunders have said, and do not write it down. Let me explain this little scene here. Angel or Christ had his feet on sea and land, signify his universal rule, and that whatever he is about to proclaim has worldwide significance. And he shouts with roar of a lion. If you look back in the Old Testament, Hosea 11:10, a lion's roar symbolizes God's voice. How about the little scroll? Well, Bible scholars suggest that the little scroll here in chapter 10 is related to the seven-sealed scroll in chapter 5, which Christ the Lamb alone was worthy to possess and open. You remember that? And this scroll cannot be opened until all the seals are broken. And the fact that the scroll in chapter 10 is referred to as little because only a little portion of the content is disclosed. The scholar said if you can see the Greek word or the Greek terms used for scroll, little scroll, and the book of life, they are used interchangeably in Revelation. So the portion that is open contains a description of the crisis of the end time and the experience of God's people, which we will talk about that in chapter 12 all the way to chapter 22. And what about the seven thunders? Well, John is not allowed to write down what the thunders have said. And this prohibition seems strange, because elsewhere in Revelation, John is always commanded to write down what he sees and hears. Let me show you a few. In Revelation chapter 1, verse 11, it says, write in a book what you see. And verse 19, again he was ordered, therefore write the things which you have seen. In chapter 14, verse 13, and I heard a voice from heaven say, write. And chapter 19, verse 9, then he said to me, write. And chapter 21, verse 5, and he who sits on the throne and said, behold, I am making all things new. And he said, write, for these words are faithful and true. And then in Revelation 22:10, it said, not to seal the words of the prophecy of this book, for the time is near. So this prohibition of writing must be very unusual and significant. The Bible teaches that some things are relevant and of special importance to God's people. So they are revealed to them with the purpose of warning and helping them to prepare for future events. But some things remain a mystery and is not revealed to God's people because the knowledge of them belong to God and are not useful to them at this time. And the Bible even said in Deuteronomy 29:29, the secret things belong to the Lord our God, but the things revealed belong to us and our sons forever, that we may observe all the words of this law. In the New Testament, Paul has a similar experience when he was caught up to the third heaven and heard inexpressible words which a man is not permitted to speak. This is recorded in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 4. And this section in chapter 10 is supposed to be kept a secret. The reason was obvious that it is probably not relevant, like I just said, to us. And there are some things about the future that God has not revealed to humans, such as when and how the final events will take place exactly. So we mustn't venture beyond what God intends to reveal to us. Verse 5. Then the angel I had seen standing on the sea and on the land raised his right hand to heaven. Verse 6. And he swore by him who lives forever and ever, who created the heavens and all that is in them, the earth and all that is in it, and the sea and all that is in it, and said, there will be no more delay. There will be no more delay. What time period is he referring to? Remember, we always look elsewhere in the Bible for understanding. In Daniel 12, a heavenly being raised his hand to swear an oath, similar to the scene described here in chapter 10. Both of them swearing an oath to God. And confirmed by the scholar that these two scenes correspond to each other. Let me explain it further. In chapter 12 of Daniel at this point was ordered to seal up the words of the scroll until the end time. And then there was a question asked, how long it will be before the persecution of the saints is over. And this heavenly messenger answered by raising his hand, swearing an oath toward heaven, to the everlasting God, that it will be what? For a time, times, and half a time. And this period of time was now answered by the angel here in chapter 10. And he said, there will be no more delay, meaning that the indicated time is over. So what is this time, times, and half time? It is referring to the 1260 years during the Middle Ages, where God's people were persecuted by the papal power, which is AD 538 until 1798. So the indicated time is now over. There should be time no longer, meaning God is about to bring earth history to its end. And the scholar also had another interpretation that there is, after this time indicated here in Daniel and also Revelation, there will be no more definite tracing of prophetic time. That is the 20th, the prophetic time was like the 2300 years, the 1260 years, or the 3.5 years, all this prophetic time. So all this has been fulfilled and no more tracing of prophetic time. So the time prophesied by Daniel is now set into motion, onward into the end time crisis. Verse 7. But in the days when the seventh angel is about to sound his trumpet, the mystery of God will be accomplished, just as he announced to his servants, the prophets. The mystery of God was proclaimed by the prophets, Daniel in particular, and this mystery is about to be accomplished. What is the mystery of God? Besides the gospel of Jesus Christ, the mystery of God in Revelation also refers to God's whole purpose in this world and his dealings with sin problem. It says here that when the seventh trumpet sound, the mystery of God will be completed. This mystery is the content of the sealed scroll of Revelation 5, which was unsealed by the Lamb. The mystery of God already set in motion, but we are allowed to know only a portion of it, suggested by the description little scroll. And we have to wait until Christ's coming. Then the fullness of this mystery will be revealed to the entire universe, as written in Revelation 20, verse 11 to 15. Verse 8. Then the voice I had heard from heaven spoke to me once more. Go, take the scroll that lies open in the hand of the angel who is standing on the sea and on the land. Verse 9. So I went to the angel and asked him to give me the little scroll. He said to me, take it and eat it. It will turn your stomach sour, but in your mouth it will be as sweet as honey. Verse 10. I took the little scroll from the angel's hand and ate it. It tasted as sweet as honey in my mouth, but when I had eaten it, my stomach turned sour. You know, interestingly, John's bittersweet experience parallel to the vision of Jeremiah and Ezekiel in the Old Testament. In the vision, Jeremiah said to God, thy words were found and I ate them, and thy words became to me a joy and delight of my heart. In Jeremiah 15:16. But however, as the prophet digested the divine message, he experienced its bitter effect. He said, I have become a laughing stock all day long. Everyone mocks me. For each time I speak, I cried aloud. I proclaim violence and destruction, because for me the word of God has resulted in reproach and derision all day long. This is in chapter 20, 7, 8, and chapter 15, 17, and 18 in the book of Jeremiah. In a similar way, Ezekiel also had a vision, a scroll in God's hand, he saw. And he was also instructed to take and eat the scroll and to go and speak to the people. Upon eating the scroll, the prophet discovered that it was in his mouth sweet as honey. Ezekiel 2, verse 10 to 3 and 4. And then Ezekiel was further instructed that in proclaiming the message, he would experience its bitter effect. That is in Ezekiel chapter 3, 5 to 11. So in these cases that I just mentioned, Jeremiah's and Ezekiel's, the eating of the scroll symbolized the commission to proclaim God-given message to a rebellious and unresponsive people. And the bitter effect after eating symbolizes a disappointment that the prophet experienced when they preached the message. How about here in chapter 10? Well, this eating the little scroll, bittersweet experience is the experience of God's people throughout earthly history. SDA Christian can relate to this also. They experienced what is called the Great Disappointment in 1844. Under the leadership of William Miller, a Baptist lay preacher and revivalist, a large group gathered from different Protestant denominations thought Christ is coming in the fall of 1844. And so they proclaimed this sweet message. However, they made a mistake in their interpretation, and they were utterly crushed and disappointed. The expectation was so sweet, but when the coming of Christ didn't take place, the disappointed believers or the Millerites experienced the bitter taste. Nevertheless, although they were disappointed, they searched and found correspondence to John's vision and understood their experience. Verse 11, "Then I was told, you must prophesy again about many people, nations, languages, and kings." This prophesying concerns many people, nation, tongues, and kings, meaning it is worldwide in scope. And this corresponds to the three angels' message in chapter 14. And this final proclamation of the gospel will evidently bring the end of all things and the closing of this world's history. So this pause or interlude between the sixth and the seventh trumpet answers the question in Daniel 12 and Revelation 6 of how long God's people will be suffering. The answer is there will be no more delay, and the end is soon. And then it further suggests that God's people will have bittersweet experiences when they proclaim God's message to rebellious people of the world. But nevertheless, they are asked to proclaim. Happy Sabbath.